good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for congregating here together with us today. It's a pleasure to be together here at BAC. It has been a base for me, for many critical practitioners, for many years. I'm very grateful to BAC's team, and we will stand with you to maintain as much of this critical infrastructure as we possibly can. We congregate here after a devastating year, a year in which we bear witness and we resist the ongoing genocide in Palestine, a genocide that is also an ecocide, an attempt to exterminate all Palestinian earth workers, human and non-human alike, that rely on each other to assert self-determination. And earth workers here is a term that I borrow from the work of Rada de Souza, who is one of the opening speakers here today. I'm proud also to stand in an institution that has spoken out and that has organized against the genocide from the beginning. And when I say beginning, I do not mean October 7, I mean the last 25 years in the context of 76 years of ongoing genocide. And I'm also proud to be here with many comrades, artists, academics, activists, organizers who have put their livelihoods on the line to speak out against genosilence, the silence that enables genocide, this extreme violent form of silence. It comes often at a cost, although this cost is of course relative to what our sisters and brothers and comrades in occupied Palestine have to bear through. They have to bear through the unbearable. There are big wins though, because never has the opposition between the state, what the state says and what the street says, been so clear. Just this last week, the organizers of the University of Amsterdam, its staff that went on strike to demand divestment from the occupation, was backed for the first time by the Dutch labor union, the FNV, because many new members joined the FNV and pushed them to stand with workers across, not just in the Netherlands, but across the world in internationalist solidarity with Palestine. We are also making gains. 2024 is also the year of de Wilders I regime in the Netherlands, led by the neo-fascist Freedom Party organization. And I say organization because this is not an actual political party. It has no members and no internal checks and balances whatsoever. The Freedom Party and their fellow constitutional traitors propagate mass deportation of our fellow dual national and undocumented citizens, propagate for further racialized police violence, the criminalization of progressive Jews and the left, the complete annihilation of critical educational infrastructure, a denial of climate catastrophe, and the denial of the very existence of the Palestinian people. And that contours, as Maria already said, a authoritarian, racist, genocidal and ecocidal politics taking power across the world, from the Trumpian win in the US to the regime of Milei in Argentina and Orban in Hungary. These neo-fascist forces propagate not biospheres, but necrospheres, spheres of death managed through planned extinction. And this notion of the necrosphere, of course, borrows from the work of Achille Mbembe, who defined necropolitics as, and I quote, the generalized instrumentalization of human existence and the material destruction of human bodies and populations. The starting point, one of the starting points for this congregation is my book Climate Propaganda, Stories of Extinction and Regeneration, published by the MIT Press together with, in partnership with BAC. And essentially my book can be summarized as following. A liberal, a libertarian, a conspiracist, an eco-fascist, and a socialist are standing by the sea. And a gigantic tsunami is coming their way. Do they see the same tsunami? I know that this all sounds like a bad joke. Normally it goes something like, this and this person go into a bar. Unfortunately, as is the case with most of what sounds, if I say something that sounds like a joke, it goes without a clue, or at least a clue to laugh at. The answer, do they see the same tsunami, is no, they do not. They do not because they don't live in the same world. Climate propaganda describes the fundamentally different ideological stories that are told by dominant powers when it comes to the rapid collapse of our ecosystem. The liberal, to start with, liberal climate propaganda, sees the climate propaganda as a result of individual consumer behavior. The problem is not the system, but the fact that you are not recycling, that you are taking too long showers, that you took that cheap holiday flight and you didn't carbon offset your conscience, your bad conscience. And we see that logic back in an enormous amount of different popular culture. Every David Attenborough documentary, narrated documentary, the ultimate voice of empire, his voice somehow, you know, even the last drowning polar bear has to somehow be tortured by this voice that comes from the sky that explains to us how he is drowning or they are drowning. Every of these documentaries ends with this logic. We need to change. We, humanity, and that is then always a humanity of individual consumers, because what are we offered at the end of the same documentaries? Yes, you can use the same companies to reduce or to offset the very structural extractivist pollution, the very structural necropolitical violence that they created in the first place. A libertarian, like Elon Musk, sees in the tsunami a great profit motive. It only adds further value to his planned Martian real estate, a scheme for the 0.1% Earth elite that wants to escape our burning and drowning world altogether. And if it is not to be exiled to Mars, libertarians like Peter Thiel, co-founder of PayPal, the person that we have to thank, J.D. Vance, being the vice president of the United States, developed the Seasteading Institute for your floating luxury villa for the other half of the 0.1% to remain on a drowned world. So the libertarians do not see in the tsunami a disaster, they see a market opportunity. They see extinction as their currency. The conspiracist does not believe the world is round in the first place, let alone that a tsunami is coming their way. This is just a Truman Show apparition designed by the globalist Davos elite to distract us from their new world order of vaccination, mind control. And a very powerful example, I think, is the work of Chris Pontius. He's one of the core members of the Flat Earth Society, and he creates this Flat Earth anti-globe. So these are these extremely detailed versions, spatial versions of what a flat Earth looks like, how it works like. It has kind of introduced like miniature lights to reproduce all climatic and explain all climatic events we see in the world, but from an entirely flat world perspective. The eco-fascist will argue that overpopulation in the global south is the real problem, meaning the fascist that does not deny the existence of climate catastrophe evidently will not introduce a policy of redistribution and global mitigation. Instead, he doubles down on the white racial right to survive, even though it is the privileged consumer class of the global north responsible for the majority of carbon output. And examples of these eco-fascist campaigns to come we can see in some of the recent Trump war room propaganda videos in which Trump appears as the superhero villain Thanos from the Avengers Marvel movie franchise. And for those not familiar with the narrative of the Avengers, Thanos is a superhero that is trying, a supervillain that is trying to fight overpopulation across the universe, snaps his fingers, and half of all populations are exterminated. Now, different than expected, Thanos became a very popular figure, particularly amongst the alt-right. And mass extermination as a policy against overpopulation don't change extractive industries, change the amount of people that are consuming, and only keep the worthy humans. So what we see in this video is Trump that snaps his fingers, in this case for half of the democratic opposition, to disappear. But we see in this a kind of seed of an exterminative neo-fascist politics being, eco-fascist politics being planted. And that is not exclusive to alt-right actors. So films like Planet of the Humans by Jeff Gibbs produced by Michael Moore, follow very similar eerie overpopulation narratives. It's not, we must accept that our human presence is already far beyond sustainability. It's one of the core narratives. Don't change the system, don't expropriate the fossil elites. No, it is human populations that we have to degrow. But then the finger is always pointed towards the global south. Overpopulation, factually, is not a problem. The mode of living is the problem. The mode of consumption, the mode of extraction is what is unsustainable, not the humans. That's a very important core narrative. Or that's a very important core fact to fight these eco-fascist propagandas. The socialist finally sees the tsunami as a phenomenon resulting from 500 years of colonial and imperialist plunders of peoples and their natures. That is, the socialist that through the tsunami becomes an eco-socialist. Devastation, a devastation of 500 years of colonialism that continues to generate fundamental inequality between those who cause global heating and those who have to live or unlive its murderous consequences. Extinction is distributed fundamentally unequally, and that requires us at the very least to redistribute extinction, to make extinct the things that make us extinct. And there is a way in which we can reverse the extinction narrative. It's not us that should go extinct. It's the fossil elites and the war machine that should go extinct, that should be made extinct. So, libertarian conspiracists, eco-fascist, socialist climate propaganda, they tell a fundamentally different story about our changing world. And that means really that propaganda is not just about sending a message, it's about consolidating entirely different conceptions, constructions of reality. 400 years ago, Pope Gregory XV founded the Sacra Congregatio de Propaganda Vitae, the sacred congregation for the propagation of the faith, the first propaganda bureau in history that was named as such, that used the term propaganda in its name, primarily aimed to maintain Catholic hegemony in the face of rising Protestantism in Europe. And we gather here today, 400 years later, at the Climate Propagandas Congregation to analyze the propagations of the necrosphere that undo our living worlds, but also to seek to propagate eco-socialist biospheres, spheres of life centered on the collective self-determination of all earth workers, where life remains imaginable, where life might even remain possible in a time of mass death. And in that light, it's worth to remember the origins of the very word propaganda. It comes from biology and describes the propagation of animals and plants, the propagation of the very possibility of life, the propagation of the conditions in which life can exist. That definition of propaganda is critical for us today. Of course, those of us invested in emancipatory politics, we tend to deride, to critique, to reject the neo-fascists for their fact-free, climate-denying propaganda. What we tend to do is make counter-propaganda or anti-propaganda. But anti-propaganda tends to rely on a kind of fact-based narrative. And facts need to be affective to be effective. Our task is not to fact-check. Our task is to propagate narratives, stories that agitate, mobilize our collective imagination and desires. Stories grounded in the fact that to truly overcome changing climates, we have to change our societies and systems with the climate. And countless people taking the streets demanding social and climate justice show us what such a transformative climate propaganda looks like. Centuries of indigenous resistance, the water and land protectors of the world, as well as socialist and liberational movements, show us what it looks like. The Palestinian solidarity movement that fights genocide and ecocide shows us what it looks like. They show us that when we expropriate and dismantle the fossil fuel industry and the war machine, this world of many worlds still holds growth for all of us, but it will be a growth of a different kind. Growth of healthy crops, of low carbon jobs by investing in teachers and caretakers, growth of time for our chosen families and friends and communities to exit the burnout world of ever-expanding consumerism, growth of radical equality, growth of transformative justice, growth to be propagated through expropriation, reparation, and regeneration. In this space, in this immersive diorama that Maria already introduced, we congregate with revolutionary human ancestors of past centuries, merged with bodies that populated collectivist, non-predatory ecosystems dating back 635 million years. A period known as the Ediacaran, and I stand myself here with Spirina. Their presence reminds us that the propagation of collectivist, non-proprietary life forms and imaginaries is as old as Earth itself. Predation is not a natural mode of being, it is not a predefined mode of being. Predation is not the norm based on which ecosystems operate. Collectivism, cooperation is just as well in our nature, or is part of our natures. And then I'm speaking of natures not as something external to humans, but nature as a relation, as that what connects human and non-human workers, nature as a relation, borrowing again from the work of Rada de Souza. I painted this paleo art. Paleo art is a term for people who paint landscapes and beings from across deep time. I painted these across the past years. In collaboration with prolet geologist Vincent van Gerven-Oei. He will be speaking tomorrow on our research on more than human proletarian behaviors and life forms, a field we describe as prolet geology, proletarian geology. Of course, there are many more revolutionaries and biota that could populate the immersive collectivist diorama we congregate in today. This is only a fragment of a much longer work, a much longer study, and any artists here that want to join me in intensive, long studies and painterly work of Ediacaran biota and the comparative research between their collectivist behaviors and revolutionary imaginaries from the 19th to the 20th century. You can meet me in the break and we can plan our painterly collective activities for the near future together. Can definitely use some help here. And for this introduction, there's one grouping of ancestors that I want to highlight in specific. Standing behind me, Thomas Sankara, emerging from a rock with two tribagidium. Sankara was the revolutionary leader of Burkina Faso from 1983 to 1987 and waged anti-colonial and anti-imperialist struggle through an eco-socialist paradigm. His 1985 campaign, One Village, One Grove, I'm sharing some images, mobilized for the planting of 10 million trees, turning reforestation and mass planting into, and I quote Sankara here, a new national and cultural tradition, end of quote. So Sankara's vision of collectivization manifests as an interdependent ecology of human and non-human earth workers. Trees and human struggle together for socialist self-determination. For Sankara, the campaign was a fight against desertification, but also a struggle for resources that would sustain the country's sovereignty from World Bank feudalism. In his own words, our struggle for the trees and forests is first and foremost a democratic and popular struggle. Because a handful of forestry engineers and experts getting themselves all worked up in a sterile and costly manner will never accomplish anything. Nor can the worked up consciences of a multitude of forums and institutions, sincere and praiseworthy though they may be, make the Sahel green again. When we lack the funds to drill wells for drinking water 100 meters deep, while money abounds to drill oil wells 3,000 meters deep. In so many ways, Sankara's eco-socialist paradigm, his transformative climate propagation, prefigures our internationalist struggles today. amongst others in the radical democratic ecological paradigm central to the Kurdish revolutionary movement. And we will be hearing about the Kurdish movement's sacrifice, victories, and current challenges after the fall, after we celebrate the fall of Assad. We will hear more on these in a moment from Heval Niloufer Koç from the Kurdistan National Congress. And we know that considering everything that is happening in Syria and Kurdistan, particularly West Kurdistan today, it is not evident that you would be here spending time with us and speaking to us. And we really value the fact that you did come and took the time. And we fully support you and your movement in order to ensure that the Rojava revolution remains a paradigm for all of us. We congregate here because we seek for self-determination from rivers to seas, and with our rivers and with our seas, as earth workers united across the human and non-human world. In this context, propaganda is not the word that represents a misconstruction of reality. It is a word, propaganda, that represents the critical means of production for repair and regeneration of our many worlds. Worlds to win, worlds worth propagating for. We're going to look at a short video now introducing the collectivist ecology of this congregation, narrated by prolet geologist Vincent W. van Gerven-Oei, and then we continue with our first speakers.
Capitalism is sustained by a mythology about the origin of life. Though systems of predation might be unjust, they are propagated as an inherent part of the circle of life, the logic of the dog-eat-dog world, where the winner takes all. In this narrative, histories of collectivism are a rarity, nothing but utopian glitches that might be desirable, but are in fact incompatible with human reality. Through this mythology, capitalism is naturalized. It is not what we want, it's simply what we are. Capitalism's mythology about the origin of life even extends beyond the period in which humans have existed on Earth. For a long time, the so-called Cambrian explosion was credited with giving birth to the geological era that brought about complex forms of planetary life. Beginning some 541 million years ago, the Cambrian rat race of competing, predatory underwater species would last for 55.5 million years. Described as a major evolutionary push driven by the desire for ocean domination, the Cambrian explosion is a neo-Darwinian fantasy. It equates the meaning of life to a zero-sum game between conqueror and conquered. It was not until 2004 that the dominance of this assertion about the beginning of complex life was formally challenged in Earth historiography, when a new geological era of 94 million years, known as the Ediacaran, was formally recognized as having preceded the Cambrian. Stretching from 635 to 541 million years ago, this 94 million years of non-predatory cooperative ecology in the Ediacaran ocean world could not have been more different from the violent predatory life cycles of the Cambrian. Ediacaran traces have been scarce. Geologist Reg C. Sprague encountered the fossils in 1946 in the Ediacara Hills in South Australia, home of the Adnyamadena people of the northern Flinders Ranges, who have shared the country with the Kuyani, Arabuna, Kokata, Nukunu, and Bangala. The word Ediacara may derive from an Aboriginal term for the region, which describes either a place of no water or the presence of hidden water. It is thus fitting for the hidden character of the Ediacaran in mainstream geology. A collectivist horizon resisting predatory enclosure. The multicellular Ediacaran life forms that Sprigg studied had no outer shells or skeletons, because they had no need to protect themselves from one another. This is why their fossil record is so sparse. Only in rare occasions has sand entered the bodies of the Ediacarans or captured Ediacaran biota in a so-called death mask, thus creating a cast, a fossilized Earth memory. The mineral composition of Earth is more equipped to fossilize the history of predation than that of non-predatory life forms, which has resulted in a false representation of its own memory for the benefit of the origin of life story propagated by capitalism. We are dealing here with a major case of geo-revisionism. The Ediacaran's morphologies resemble circular discs, worm-like shapes, and elegant plant-like forms characterized by a quilted body architecture. Some geologists maintain that the Ediacarans cannot be classified as either plants or animals, their existence defying the biological or gendered classifications applied from the Cambrian onward. The Ediacaran fossils testify to a vast time frame of complex life forms coexisting in a cooperative, collectivist ecology without any traces of predatory relationships between them. Yet when Sprigg encountered the Ediacaran, he was met with disinterest by the International Geological Congress, and the myth of the Cambrian predatory era as the foundation of complex life forms persisted for several decades. For the paleontologists and geologists operating in capitalist enclosure, an enclosure not just of space, but of the very concept of life, it was unthinkable that the birth of complex existence would not be the product of competitive, predatory, and extractive relationships. Intelligence had to be the result of a win-lose dichotomy, a zero-sum game driving life forward from deep time, just like capitalism is driving the present into a futureless future. When the Ediacaran eventually gained recognition, it was described as the Garden of Ediacara, turning a non-predatory geological era of complex life forms into a transcendental paradise, as if an alternate collectivist ecology could only be acknowledged when placed outside of our time and our space. Like a biblical Garden of Eden, this world might have existed, but only in a vacuum, a world separated from our world, with other worldly laws no longer applicable to our present. This geo-revisionism aims to isolate a non-predatory era from our common Earth history, in order to sustain the narrative that the brutal reality of our present originated in the Cambrian, and to naturalize the inherent violence of capitalism into a geology of its own. But we know better. Comrades Charnia, Rangia, Kimberella, Dickinsonia, Swartpuntia, Ernietta, Parvancorina, Spergina, and Tribrachidium, they form our collectivist geology, an interdependent ecology shaped through photosymbiosis, chemosymbiosis, and osmotrophy, for whom the Cambrian arms race of shells, spikes, and teeth to come was irrelevant for nearly 100 million years. The beginning of complex multicellular life was the result of other than human collectivist work. Today we proudly declare that our egalitarian desires represent our true geo-heritage, an other life origin of 94 million years of collectivism. Did the Ediacaran dream with Karl Marx in the way the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, whose language named this collectivist geological era, practiced the dreaming as a space where ancestors, descendants, and successors coexist across time and space? Did the Ediacaran dream with Vladimir Lenin a shared drive to shape the means of production for common life systems? An avant-garde turned pre-garde to stop the predator from coming into being in the first place? Did the Ediacaran dream with Alexandra Kollontai as her horizon of a new revolutionary sexuality, an expanded collective family, a symbiotic sensuality, a redistribution of love, mirrors the non-gendered, neither plant nor animal life forms of the Ediacaran? Did the Ediacaran dream with Ho Chi Minh of a classless paradigm of interdependence, specific to place but interconnected through pan-oceanic currents of nutrients in solidary circulation? Did the Ediacaran dream with Thomas Sankara of a communalization of ecology, of more than human proletarians, enabling new symbiotic collectives of earthworkers? The study of the Ediacaran belongs to the field of prolate geology, earth memory studies of other than human proletarian and collectivist life forms. It is not merely a geology of rock and solid earth, but a geology of shared ecosystem work and collective imaginary. Prolate geology is a collectivist dreaming that ties other than human work to the present and our struggles for deep futures for all. From a linear time perspective, the 94 million years of collectivism of the Ediacaran did end. Growth of oceanic primary producers, such as cyanobacteria and algae, contributed to the spread of heterotrophs, life forms that cannot produce their own food and extract nutrition from other sources of organic carbon. The high levels of oxygen that enabled photosymbiosis, chemosymbiosis, and osmotrophy as a foundation of cooperative ecology in the Ediacaran steadily dropped, and the Earth faced an anoxic extinction event, the Cambrian explosion. What used to be considered the birth of complex life, the Cambrian, in truth embodied the undoing of collectivist life forms, the Ediacaran. And similar to the Ediacarans, our access to air, to water, to nutrition is cut off today by Neo-Cambrian predatory bodies. Trillion-dollar companies like Amazon and Bayer extract the possibility for the many to breathe. These corporations are mega heterotrophs that create nothing but prey on everything. Our demand is for oxygen for all, firmly grounded in 94 million years of our Ediacaran otherworld. No longer will we be misled by capitalist geo-revisionism, for we stand united, human, non-human, other than human, and more than human proletarians, in collectivist Ediacaran dreaming.